everyone, and in today's video we're going to be talking about the newest ban for the Elestrals TCG, which is actually going to be going around drataya, but we're also going to be talking about some of the newest limits that have come to the game, along with some of the limited list and how it's going to impact the game in the future, and how I think it's good or bad for the TCG as a whole. Starting off, let's actually talk about the banned card drataya and what it does. This says when a player casts Ambrosia, you can draw 2 cards. Now that might not seem like the most broken thing in the world. However, whenever you pair it and you consider the fact that there's actually 2 different Ambrosia cards that this works with, you're able to draw essentially 3, and 3 is 6 times 2 is 12 cards of your deck. There's also cards that allow you to get your Ambrosia back, so you can draw even more cards that way, not counting the fact that this deck also, and when I say this deck, I'm referring to the Waspire OTK deck, which essentially focuses around these cards to be able to draw through the vast majority of your deck, to find 3 copies of the Exalt Flare, to be able to get a bunch of fire spirits. I just had a stroke, please ignore me. To get a bunch of fire spirits on the board, to then nexus them over to Waspire, which this is okay. So the ban is a little difficult for me personally, because this is the card that caused all the issues. This said you can disenchant 1 from an Ignector or Waspire to force an opponent to expend 2. This Waspire's effect can be activated any number of times on your turn. This is the problem card, but this is the enabler card. The issue with this card is that without this, it's not that broken. But if you leave this in the game and you ban this, somebody else is going to find a different way to do this with drataya. So I understand the ban. However, I love this little guy. It's one of my favorite cards. I absolutely love this little guy. So I'm really upset that it got sent to Tartarus, but that is going to be the ban. And then none of these cards actually got limited, which makes me really happy, considering the fact that this was a very key portion to the deck. But I'm mostly happy that these 2 did not get put to any sort of limit or anything like that, which is fair because these are the least broken cards in the entire world, in my opinion. This card right here is just stupid and fun, but I love it. So how do I think this ban impacts the game? I mean, essentially it just takes away a bunch of first turn KO decks that essentially make the game impossible to play against if you're fighting this and they get really good on their first opening hand. The main issue with the drataya Exalt Flare Waspire OTK is that there was really no good way around it. If your opponent just mulliganed twice, got rid of 4 spirits, so what? You run essentially 6 copies of Ambrosia. You run cards that can bring your Ambrosia back. You run a bunch of different things, so you don't really care about anything. It's super annoying and brainless to play against. So I'm glad it's gone. I'm sad this little guy is gone. To sum everything up, the next thing I'm going to talk about is actually going to be a limit that was made, and I do not own any copies of this card actually, which is kind of surprising considering how much of this game I've opened. But that is going to be Lavalith. So I will be putting a picture of it on screen since I can't really show it, but this card says this Lavalith can be normal cast with 2 fire spirits if an opponent has at least 2 more enchanting spirits than you do. When you cast this Lavalith, you can target and destroy a rune. This being limited to 1 is actually really helpful for a plethora of different reasons. The first one being it's extremely easy to fall behind on enchanting spirits. With how important Nexus and Divine Runes and everything like that are, it's very easy to fall behind just to be able to slap down a 6/4 beater that can also destroy a rune in the back, which means that now you kind of have to rely on Earthquake to take it down if you're running something like 5 Guys. So this is a very difficult card to play around, but it's almost essential in a lot of decks and very easy to splash, because splashing 2 fire into something is not very difficult at all. The next card that I'm going to talk about is actually another card that I do not have, and it is called Resting on Your Laurels. Both this and Lavalith in the next card were limited to 1, which is the biggest ban list that Elestrals has ever had to date, which is absolutely amazing. Resting on Your Laurels reads, if your opponent has more enchanting spirits on the field than you do, very similar to Lavalith, target and destroy the opponent's Elestral with the least number of enchanting spirits. If it is a tie, your opponent chooses. This is almost a little difficult for me to say whether or not I think this is a huge issue, but I do think it is a nice counter rune in general to be able to force your opponent into certain aspects. So, I personally think it's good that it's limited to 1, but the issue is now we have a lot less counter runes for removal. Just straight up removal, that is, because before this we had Resting on Your Laurels, we had Earthquake, and then we had Shield of Achilles to bounce back to hand. Aside from that, there's not that many counter runes that can just straight up destroy something or send something back to the hand, so we're a little limited on that. And then now with the next limit to 1 being Earthquake. It's very simple. It says target and destroy an Elestral for 2 Earth Spirits. This was pretty much a 3 of in every single deck, and now it is limited to 1. So you just limited the amount of destruction that we can have for big guys in Earthquake and Resting on Your Laurels. So now we have to rely on Shield of Achilles, which in my opinion, I think is much healthier for the game. And things like Poison Tipped Arrow to stop the Ascensions, things along those lines. I think that having to rely on Shield of Achilles is actually a really good thing. So real quick, let's compare the card that I'm saying is good that we rely on to the card that just got limited. The first one says target and destroy an Elestral. So that means it goes directly to the underworld, and you have to rely on something like Rise from the Ashes or another effect to be able to bring it back. Shield of Achilles says the Shield of Achilles can only be cast after an opponent Elestral declares an attack. Expend a spirit equal to the Elestral's enchantment cost in order to negate that attack and return it to their hand. So this essentially takes the card and makes it worthless. It throws out everything that you just built up for and essentially throws it out the window. Whereas this doesn't entirely throw it out the window. It makes it to where you can still use it. You can still play with it and try to ascend to it again and claw your way back into the game. I think this is very healthy, whereas having 3 copies of this, 3 copies of Resting on Your Laurels, 3 copies of Gorgon's Gaze, and 3 copies of Poison Tipped Arrow was just so much destruction and negation of the game that it made it very difficult to justify playing a big boss Elestral. So now that we're on the topic of big boss Elestrals, the reason why I think these bans and limits happened is to incentivize people to play cards like Celestlio, Ferrogeist, Chronodile, a bunch of other big 3-cost Elestrals. That way you have a payoff for these big guys. If you get Shielded of Achilles with your Celestlio, you have a little bit of play around to it, right? You can just not attack and just use its abilities to be able to pop a bunch of cards on the field. You can use it as a really good wall to protect yourself from other big beaters, but at the same time, if you do swing into a Shield of Achilles, it comes back to your hand. So you can still play a bunch of different ways to get this back out on the field, as opposed to where if it goes to the grave, or I'm sorry, the underworld, you don't have to rely on Rise of the Ashes or another Elestrals effect or rune effect to be able to get it back into the deck and then draw it or have the pieces to get it back out. Whereas if it's in your hand, you have the chance to special ascend to it. You have a bunch of different things you can do. So I think that having Shield of Achilles be the main way of bouncing cards back to the hand rather than just straight up destroying them is actually very healthy for the game in the long run, and I think it'll build up a lot more hype for people to be able to use amazing looking big boys like this Celestlio. But that is essentially the ban list and everything that was on it. Overall, I'm happy with the ban list. I think that it'll be a very, very, very good thing moving forward for the game. But let me know what you guys think down below, and let me know what you guys think will be some of the top decks once this ban list comes into effect. With that, I'm going to go ahead and get on out of here. Thank you all so much for watching, and I will see you guys in the next video. Bye-bye.